Good evening, everybody. Today is Monday, April 26, 2021, and this is a Moscow City Council Sustainability Workshop. I welcome everybody here, and I got to share with you up here on the DS, all 6 of my counselors and myself, and this is the first time in months that we've been together up here because of the COVID. A couple of things, we're all wearing masks, and everybody in the audience are wearing masks as well. And with that being said, every one of us up here has taken the vaccine, the double shots, and that's always been an encouragement for those folks out there to please get this thing, get it behind us so that we can move on with our lives. The sooner the better. We're seeing light at the end of the tunnel. I'm not going to preach on that, but it gave me a few minutes in front of everybody because I know we've got a great audience out there. And so with that being said, we will get started. And so welcome, everyone. What we're doing this evening, and this is something we've been working on for quite a while, the different environment, carbon-free emissions, so on and so forth, and we really ascertained some great goals this past decade. We're looking very forward about what we can do this decade. Tonight, we're not going to solve all those issues, folks, but what we're going to have is a good discussion, and we're going to have some ideas that we can be able to direct our staff how this thing is going to go, where to go forward. And you got lots of folks that we're going to be talking about. Did you have something for me?
One of our guests is
He's having a hard time hearing.
Oh, yeah. Can you hear us? Give me a thumbs up if you can hear us.
No.
Corey, we
Sorry,
have
we
some
can't
kind
hear
of.
you. If you can hear me,
I can hear you.
I think you're muted.
What?
Tina's muted. Tina's muted.
Corey, have we got something muted up here on the? Oh. How about now? Can you hear us now?
Thank you very much. Yes, we can.
Okay, well, you didn't get the chance to hear the first few minutes of my conversation up here, so I'm going to give it to you, all those folks out in TV land that's watching with us this night. Everybody out here in the audience have heard this, but for the first time in months, we're all together up here, my council as well as myself, and this has been the first time, I couldn't even tell you when, 14 months or however long it's been. But I want to share with everybody listening out there, we all are wearing our masks, our audience is wearing a mask, we're following the social distance protocol whenever we possibly can. For all of us up here, we have had the vaccine, and I wanted to mention that because that's a very important thing for us in our fine city. For those folks, I encourage everybody to do this and help us get by this pandemic. So the sooner we do this, the closer we are to getting back to our lives as normal, and nobody in the world any more than Bill Lambert is looking forward for that day to come, as well as all these counselors up here. And I can tell you what, I thank everybody in our audience and everybody watching us, and of course I thank everyone for the tremendous efforts that they have put forward. And with that, we're going to start, and welcome again. This is our workshop for the Sustainability Workshop with the Moscow City Council. We're not necessarily going to make any concrete decisions tonight, but we're going to get some ideas and we're going to be moving forward. We've got a plan of attack. Our staff is here, and as we go along, we will have some directions so that they can get feedback, and this is a first good step for us here, ladies and gentlemen, in 2021. And with that, I am going to let Tyler Palmer, our Deputy City Supervisor for Public Works and Services, I'm going to turn him over to introductions.
Thank you, Your Honor. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. We are really excited to be here and be able to talk about this evening. This is a conversation that has been in the works for some time. It's an immense point of pride for us as a city, as directed by the City Council, that we have such a sustainability focus. We have an environmental services department, which for a city our size is really unique, and it's something that the council has put a lot of focus on and effort toward assuring that we're behaving in a sustainable way as a city, and that we're striving toward having sustainability and ultimately trying to diminish our greenhouse gas impact and strive for carbon neutrality. And so it's something that back in 2010, the city established a goal. This goal was a pretty hefty goal, a 20% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2020. And so for the structure for this workshop tonight, what we would like to do is talk a little bit about that goal and really celebrate the achievement of that goal. And we will walk through how it was that we arrived at achieving that goal really briefly. And then we have what is a pretty large topic of conversation. And so in order to do that, we've tried to break it down and provide some structure. It's important that I emphasize that the focus of this meeting is the city operations itself. So while there is certainly room to look at emissions citywide among our residents, our real purpose today is to talk about the city operations and the greenhouse gases emitted as a result of the city operations. And so that's what our focus is. And for the purposes of that, we have broken down the city emissions into 6 categories to make it more digestible and to make it easier to analyze each category and have a discussion on each category. And so we'll go through the 6 categories and show how each of those 6 categories helped us achieve the goal that we've achieved. And then we will look at the 6 categories forecasting out in the future and talk about how we take steps toward carbon neutrality. And so during each of the sections that we will present, we'll ask for council's feedback. So the idea is that we don't want to monologue at you for an hour and a half, have everybody's eyes glaze over, we all fall asleep, and then we wake you up and say, hey, now let's talk about it. What we'd like to do is engage on each section as we go. In order to make that work well, I think it's important that we all focus on that section. And then at the end, if there's something we haven't covered that the council would like to cover after we've gone through all of the sections, then at that point it'd be great to circle back. But if we can stay on track and see if something gets hit in one of the future segments that you might have, we'll probably be able to get through more of this because there is a lot to go through. So with that, I'd like to just dive in and talk about the 20% goal. This is exciting. This is something that for a decade we've been working toward, and let's get this on. See if we can advance this thing. Nope. Does not want to play. Might be doing this from over here. Or we might have Corey come help.
It's good to have a guy like Corey here helping us, ladies and gentlemen.
Back here? Okay. So we'll see if we can make it work from over here or not. Okay, there it goes. All right, now it's wanting to play. All right. So, as I mentioned, we've got the 6 segments, the 6 sectors that we've broken down our greenhouse gas inventory into. We'll cover this in a lot more detail as far as what goes into each of these as Kelly goes through her presentation. But we've got buildings and facilities, we've got streetlights and traffic signals, we have the city vehicle fleet, we have employee commute, solid waste, and water and wastewater treatment facilities. So each of these segments contributed toward our accomplishment of this goal. And this took a lot of tracking and a lot of work. This is something that, one of the biggest obstacles to greenhouse gas emissions is just tracking them accurately. It's making sure that we're gathering the data that we need to gather so that we know what it is that we're emitting and we know what impact each of these segments are having. And then from there, we can start to identify opportunities within those segments. And so what we've got listed here are some of the major projects that contributed to the reduction within each of these sectors. And so on the right, you can see the reduction that we experienced in the sector. The 20.8% reduction here is the percentage of the reduction within that 20%. So the 20% total goal, this segment represents 20% of that 20% reduction that we saw. And so we had things like LED lighting changeouts in the buildings. We had HVAC updates that had a big impact. Our water conservation. When you look at our pumping that happens in the water conservation, that can have an enormous impact. The Hamilton Low Aquatic Center boiler really helped us out. And then also a combining of our information systems equipment. And so, as you can see, we got a little New Year's ball drop going on here, and it came down just a little bit. So our next area was street lights and traffic signals. One of the early things that we were able to do was we got a state grant and we were able to change out our traffic signals to LED lights. That's something you might not think about a lot, but the incandescent bulbs in a traffic signal that are going 24/7, 365 can have a huge power draw. And so that alone had a big impact. And then the other one was our LED streetlights. At this point, I would be remiss if I didn't give a shout out to a really great partner of ours, Avista Utilities. Avista was wonderful in their efforts to help us with this. They really accelerated the change out of our residential streetlights to LEDs, really in an effort to help us meet this goal. I mean, they really went above and beyond and rearranged some things and got some staffing on board and really helped us try and meet this 20% goal. So a big thank you to them for that process. But that LED technology, this is a great example of how technology can really change the game for us. We weren't really talking about LEDs for a lot of the applications in which we're able to talk about LEDs now, just 10, 15 years ago, even 5 years ago. And so it's really amazing to see how that has progressed and the impact that that has.
Tyler, I am going to follow your suggestions and your rules, and I really appreciate that, but I do have a question already, just from the last slide, okay, this one is fine. When you said the sector total reduction was a percentage of the 20%, it looked to me like that one was a reduction in that particular sector, 2008 until now, and the number on the bottom is the percentage of the total 20%.
Yeah, I'm sorry if I wasn't
Okay.
clear. Yeah, that's exactly
Okay.
right. So that the bottom number here, the 9.1% overall, that is of the
Perfect.
20%.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. And Kelly's going to have to correct me every time I misstep on this because she's the real expert here. So just smack my hand when you need me to.
You're doing fine.
So the next is our vehicle fleet. As the council is aware, we've put a lot of effort into the vehicle fleet. We have our Eco Driver program through which we train new drivers about the expectations of vehicle use in our fleet, and that has shown some great results. And then we have an alternate fuel transition plan. I think we were the first, if not one of the very first cities in the state of Idaho to have an alternate fuel transition plan. It's an aggressive plan. We've only had it in place for 5 years, and we've updated it twice based on new technology coming out in an accelerated fashion. So that's really exciting. We bought our very first EV just a few years ago. We have several EVs in the fleet now, and we have many vehicles that we're targeting for electric vehicle changeover. So that's a really exciting development. Employee commute. This is going to be a really interesting one as we talk about this, especially when we get into Kelly's look into the future on this. But we have increased fuel efficiency for employee vehicles. That has a big impact. The vehicles that our employees are now buying are newer vehicles, more fuel efficient vehicles. We have employees who own hybrids and EVs, and that has an impact. And then also telecommuting. Telecommuting came into play with this 2020 goal. We saw its impact in a fairly big way this last year with the COVID-19 pandemic. Solid waste is our next sector. We actually saw an increase in solid waste. And a lot of that has to do with not as many opportunities for reduction in solid waste and just growth. So in a lot of these areas, we were able to overcome growth through technological advances, through new methods. Solid waste was one where we saw an increase based on that growth.
Tyler, that's a good point, and it's something for all of us to recognize too. As we have growth, it's going to be challenging for us. We'll make some headway, of course, naturally we will, but that's going to be one of the challenges that we're going to be very much facing with solid waste, correct?
Yes, I think that's a really important point, Mr. Mayor, is that we have a growing city and we provide life-sustaining services. And so inevitably we will have emissions. We don't have the option to just say, oh, let's just treat X amount less sewer and shut down X amount of the streets and produce X amount less. We don't have those options because they are life-sustaining services. And so it really is a balancing act. Yep. And as you all know, with as tight of budgets as we have, it requires a lot of creativity because we don't just have piles of money sitting around. A lot of times we'll see programs and we'll get a phone call and it'll say, hey, there's this really cool program in X state and they're doing this cool thing. And we look at it and we're just with some envy often. It's like, wow, but that's through a state grant program or something that just simply isn't available to us. And so we go back to the old Teddy Roosevelt, it's do what you can with what you have where you're at. And that's really what we have to focus on.
Mr. Mayor, if you may, if I may, not you may, I'd like to ask the question. So this has no correlation or no relation at all to the recycling challenges we had, or not? That's a question, believe it or not.
No, it really doesn't. The way we calculate this is actually based on the size of the container facilities. So some of this increase is actually, we went from like a 3-yard container to a 6-yard container out of the city shop. Part of that's because the more parks we add, the more trash we have to collect at these kind of facilities, the more we have to account for in our own emissions.
And so as we talk about what we can do moving forward, there are some strategies that we can employ to actually try to engage with this stuff and right-size some of this. But it's an area where we have an opportunity for improvement. Water and wastewater facilities, as you can imagine, these are just enormous users of electricity for us. And so some of the steps that we've taken, this is a huge percentage of the total. Things like variable frequency drives. I think most of the council at this point is familiar with those. It's basically taking it from an on-off light switch to something with a dimmer for a lot of our pumps. And so it's something that rather than just being on, running at full power, or being off, it can be on but running at the appropriate needed amount of power, and it really can save us quite a bit. We've done a lot of LED lighting upgrades. The water conservation program and operational updates. The one I would really like to highlight on this list is operational updates. Mike Parker and his team with our water department went through a process where just by operational updates, they were able to save millions of gallons of water just by changing the way they operate the system, running a consistent pressure system, floating the system at a certain level. It's kind of the equivalent of putting a smart thermostat on your home is what they've done with the water system, and it just makes it far more efficient, not only from a water conservation standpoint, but also from a greenhouse gas standpoint. And so then we come down a little bit more. That was 9.7% of the total. And so here we are with the total success. 20% fireworks, and there was much rejoicing.
We should have some graffiti going off in here, a little something.
I really don't think that we can underestimate how really neat this is. For the council to have established a goal, to set that threshold, and for the city to have pursued that goal through many different councils and maintain that focus, I think it's a real testament to the values that the city has and how much importance we place on these efforts. So that's how we got here. And so now we're going to talk about where we go from here. Kelly Cooper will be with our Environmental Services Department. Will be leading our conversation from here. Kelly has just done the lion's share of the work for this. She is our resident expert. She has been crunching these numbers for months and months and months in preparation for this. And we're really excited to present you all with this. Just as to lay a little bit of groundwork, one of the things that we really want to do as we move forward from here is the initial council goal was for a 20% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. And as you all know, that's part of the equation. What we emit is part of the equation. Where we would really like to go at this point, having seen this, it's kind of like when you go to lose weight, the first 5 pounds is the first 5 pounds. It comes off real easy. It's the low-hanging fruit. It's like, I guess I'll cut back on the ice cream a little bit. The next 5-10 pounds gets a little bit harder. We've hit a lot of low-hanging fruit. We're going to identify things that we can continue to do to continue to lower our emissions, which is a critical part. We need to be as efficient as possible. But where we would really like to get at, and where we think that we want to shift the conversation to, is toward carbon neutrality. Let's look at the other side of that equation and look at some sequestration activities, because there very well could be something that we could do from a sequestration standpoint that's more efficient from a monetary standpoint and a greenhouse gas standpoint than maybe something that we're doing from a greenhouse gas reduction perspective. And so that's really what we would like to set the stage and talk about, how we can further refine our greenhouse gas emissions and then look to the future to really try and dial in what neutrality looks like for the city and how we pursue that. And so
Is that what Kelly's going to be sharing with us this evening?
Kelly is going to run through right now how we further refine those emissions in each of these areas.
Great. Welcome, Kelly.
Hi.
Thank
Thanks
you
for having me.
Absolutely.
Okay, so where do we go from here? So the idea is that we'll start with where do we expect to go based on our current projects that we have in the capital improvement program? Where do we expect us to land after we fully implement the alternative fuels transition plan? And then I want to take a look at emissions by source. We talk a lot about how they're broken down by sectors that we've already discussed, but we want to look at that source. Where are those emissions within those sectors coming from? And then we'll talk about each sector individually, and I'll highlight a few projects that are in your packet. They're broken down into kind of 3 tiers. We have our quick wins. Those are our, remaining low-hanging fruit type projects. We have our mid-level, which gets a little more expensive, a little harder to accomplish, and then our aspirational. Those are kind of our big projects. Not all sectors have all 3 of those potentials. Some, we've already done all the low-hanging fruit. So we have only the mid-level and aspirational left. And then we'll kind of see how we land when we project that out with these projects involved.
And a huge thanks to our Sustainable Environment Commission. They've been absolutely key in helping guide this process, in reviewing this framework. You'll have a letter in your packet from the commission, from the commission chair as authorized by the commission. They really have been a wonderful, wonderful resource for us as we work through this process. And we have many of them here with us tonight.
Hey, just for a minute, for any of you folks that are on this the commission, would you please raise your hand so you can be identified? I know we've got a bunch of them. I know Victoria's here. There's others, isn't there?
They're on the Zoom, Mayor.
Oh, on the Zoom with, okay, how many on the Zoom? I'm sorry, about 1, 4?
I think they're 4.
Okay.
There's quite a few that attend regularly.
Well, and I know that, and one of the things with the Zoom, the tough thing about Zoom is not getting a chance to get everybody recognized for their good work and the hard efforts that they do. And so I certainly, as well as this council, appreciate all the work and efforts. Now, and I'll get back to you here just in a second, Kelly, but one of the things about being a chair is I got to talk whenever I want to, but I'll try to keep it as quick as possible. But always remember, folks, we're moving forward with this endeavor because it's very, very important. We've got the right team in place, and part of the group is our Sustainable Environment Commission, as well as folks like Kelly, Tyler, Kyle, so on and so forth. One thing I want to say quickly, and it's a little bit of an obstacle, and it's one of those things, we have a difficult time getting, we talked about money. You mentioned something about money and funds, and we live in a state that, as we all know, I don't necessarily want to call them penny pinchers. However, we're in a state that is very frugal in how they spend. And to be honest, we've got legislators out there that think cities just simply waste money, and a lot of money. And we hear that constantly. I'm on the Association of Idaho Cities board, and those are one of those things that the board is trying to work. And not that is going to stop this effort. Don't get me wrong here, but it's one of those little bumps and obstacles that we run into, and we'll work with that, and we'll work around some of those things. So I just wanted to share that with everybody that's listening with us this evening. Thank you, Kelly.
Perfect. All right, so we'll start with this very busy graph. So this graph actually shows anything to the left of this line right here is our actual inventories that have been completed to date. So we have our baseline here is 2008, which we talked about, or Tyler talked about earlier in the presentation. And then we have everything here is what we forecasted. This forecast includes everything that is already in existence in the capital improvement plan, as well as the alternative fuels transition plan. I went through and picked out every single plan that would have an impact on our operations, whether it was a positive or negative for our emissions, and I planned that out to see what it would look like for the next 10 years. So as you can see, this white line up here, or light blue line, whatever color it is actually the 20% goal that we had set, 2008. So we managed to maintain that goal, which is pretty fantastic in and of itself. That is not an easy feat. It is very easy once you meet a goal to just go back the other way and ignore it. So the fact that we actually do maintain it is pretty awesome.
I think just a quick example that illustrates that is, in the face of growth, it can become difficult just because of the growth. 20% more people means 20% more water system, more sewer system, more transportation network, et cetera, more streetlights. But we also have things coming, as the council knows, like our temperature provision of our MPDS permit at our water reclamation and reuse facility. If that ends up resulting in a chiller, which we have calculated in here, that could have an enormous impact. And so that's just more greenhouse gas emissions that we've got to try and offset elsewhere, in addition to just swimming against the current with the 20% goal.
And that's with when you're talking about the chiller, and I'll take it just 1 inch farther. You're talking about something that may be a mandated EPA thing for us. It's not something the city's just going to come up with. It's something that's going to be dictated to us because of our phosphorus levels and temperature. Correct?
The temperature. That's absolutely right, Mr. Mayor.
And did you say that is included in your projections?
The chiller is
Okay.
included in here.
So we took the capital program and calculated out, accounted for growth, the whole thing, and then, okay, does this have a negative or a positive impact, and what's the estimated impact? And so that's all reflected here.
And by the way, ladies and gentlemen, if we don't have to do it, we sure as heck will not.
Yeah,
It'll save us emissions and money.
Yeah, Brandy, if we want to get into the specifics of those certain projects, those are listed in the CCSR
Yeah.
in your packet. We can talk about
Okay.
those assumptions that were made based on, a certain amount of kilowatt hours per year.
Right, and using this capital improvement plan kind of as the guiding document for what projects you expect
what's
to
coming
occur
up.
over the next
Yes.
10 years.
That's right.
Okay.
And so in your packet, that document is actually titled, Evaluated Capital Improvement Projects. So that Excel sheet includes all the projects that
This
I
guy here.
included in this forecast.
Yep, yep, we've got it.
And before we move on, I want to point out this dip right here that we have. So part of computing this inventory is using these statistics from EPA that they put out every 2 years called the eGrid statistics. And those statistics have to do with the rate of emissions from producing electricity. They're regional factors, so we're kind of at the mercy of our electrical grid for a lot of this. We already know this purple line here is our water wastewater infrastructure. We know that's energy intensive. It takes a lot of energy to pump water around the city and to treat it. So we really are, a little bit at the mercy of Avista and other regional providers when it comes to this. But it's still something that we should keep in mind, that as these start to come through, we are going to see some little spikes, partially because of the way our grid changes.
It also illustrates the importance of continued cooperation with these utility companies, because that is one of the biggest impacts that can happen is as they transition toward clean energy. That has an enormous impact on our statistics and numbers because so much of our use is in electricity.
Well, and they are working that way, that direction as
They are.
well.
They
Vista
absolutely
is,
are.
I know that.
So we will recognize and receive the benefit of that as well.
Yep.
So the more we can support them in that effort, it's also good.
So Kelly, is built into that, I think there's some, Avista has said what their timeline is for shifting their energy portfolio. Did you follow what they're predicting?
That
or-
is not built in, partially
Okay.
because it is a regional factor. So it's actually not just Avista's emissions that we have to worry about with that,
And I-
because
and
it's such a regional number.
Yeah, and I think that's why it's going to be really important for us to take a look at this annually as the model shifts, where we at with the eGrid statistics and stuff like that. So, and it'll either be incorporated up or down as their portfolio changes over time.
Right, and that side of things, the utility side, for the city, I know it could be different for residences who have ability to have different sources of heat for their home if they choose, but for the city side of things, we're really at the mercy of the utility providers.
Electricity is what we have to run these critical systems, period. Yep.
So speaking of which, I thought it would be helpful for us to get an idea of what these emissions look like by source, rather than just looking at them in these sectors, which, this gives us a way to look at it as it's at its source level. So this green bar is actually our electrical consumption since 2008. And we can see we actually have made some headway. We've got this nice downward trend, which is awesome, both between our own efficiency, and as well as efficiencies within the grid. And then we've got our blue line here is our combusted fuel, so that's things we've seen with our vehicle fleet. The big one that's hurting us here is our natural gas use in buildings. So for heating our facilities, that's one that might be worth targeting. And then the red is pretty much everything else. So that's our solid waste and our employee commute fall into that category. Let's see, was there something else I wanted? Nope, that's it. Okay. All right, any questions on those so far before we move into our first sector?
No, I think we can move on, Kelly.
Perfect. All right, so buildings and facilities includes, just like it sounds, all of our buildings and facilities within the city. So city-owned and operated facilities are included here. But this also includes things like our park bathrooms, and things of that nature. The only facilities not included in this are our water and wastewater treatment facilities, because those are accounted for in a different sector. And then these are kind of the projects that we'll highlight today. They're more detailed in your packet. So first quick win is finishing out our LED conversions in our buildings. We have done a lot of these, but there are still a few facilities left that we can do. And then also switching to smart thermostats, right? So if we can keep our temperatures controlled, we will have an impact not only on our kilowatt hours we use in a year, but also our natural gas. And I predicted out, so this would be the difference for the Main Street Fire Station 1. If we switch to LEDs and smart thermostats there, we'd see at least about a 50% reduction in electrical use. Just to give you an idea what that would look like. A mid-level project, getting into our building envelope assessments and repairs. So looking at each of our facilities individually, seeing where we might be losing heat or gaining heat when we don't want it. And this is going to vary so much between facilities, right? This is an older building. It probably has more issues than a newer one. The police station shouldn't really have any. The new police station shouldn't have any, right? Because it's a brand new building. But taking a look at that, this could be, anything from a quick win, new caulking around windows, new door sweeps, that sort of thing, all the way up through new roof and new insulation, or new windows, say like City Hall or the Public Works and Services building. So this will be it'll vary in its impact level, it'll vary in its cost. And now we got to talk about solar, right? So one of the easiest ways or biggest ways that we can tackle that electrical consumption is to start producing some of our own. And I wanted to give you an idea of different facilities that we have and different energy users that we have in our facilities. So I chose 3 different energy users: City Hall, Egan Youth Center as kind of a mid-level, and then Lena Whitmore Park. Low energy, high energy, and kind of a mid-level, right? And then across the top, we have our offset amounts. So this first column represents the cost for a 20% solar offset. So we use solar to produce 20% of that building's energy. Obviously, a high energy user, that means more energy needs to be produced. So it's a higher cost, more panels. And then we see our greenhouse gas savings attached to that. These 3 facilities I evaluated at 20, 40, 60, and 80%, just so we can kind of see the scalability. And see that increase in costs and savings. But also I wanted to give you guys an idea that, each facility is different. It has different energy needs. So we need to be able to look at each facility individually. We won't be able to do a blanket target. And we also have physical constraints, right? The number of solar panels to offset 80% of City Hall's use probably aren't going to fit on the roof of this facility. So we need to start thinking about, okay, does it make sense to put any here, or what percentage makes sense for the building that we're in?
As we started to work our way through this, it became all the more obvious, as with many things that we do, that in Moscow we really have to use a scalpel and not a machete. It's something where, since we do have limited resources, and we have a unique community with those unique needs, that if we're strategic with how we look at it, and solar implementation is no exception, we can really have a far bigger bang for our buck, because it might make a ton of sense on facility A and really not make very much sense on facility B. And so rather than just having a machete, we put in X amount on everything. It's like, no, we might want to put in, it make a ton of sense to put in 60% at the pool, but only 20% at City Hall or something like that. And really having a customized plan as we move forward.
Is the cost that's listed there just for the panels and installation themselves? Is that it?
It's the panels
Yeah.
and installation.
That includes installation.
So I used a Vista's watt generator to figure this out. So it's a really rough estimate. Obviously, a solar expert or a solar installer would have a better idea of what this would
And
ultimately
then,
be.
I mean, I imagine, and I don't know the complexities of it, but I know you get some, you get something back, or you can store it or get credits for it. Is that worked into the savings that's on there?
Yes.
Okay.
So essentially it goes, when we produce our own, it kind of runs our meter backwards, is the way it's best described. Runs our meter backwards while it's producing, and then when we need it, we pull it from the grid.
Okay.
I want to make a quick point here too, is that as we go along with our endeavors, there very well may be some granting opportunities for us. And I know everybody's watching for those. I want to share that with the folks that are watching us and the folks that are here, is that when those opportunities come forward for us, we will utilize any of that stuff that we possibly can. And I think probably with the administration we have in this country, I think you're going to see more of that availability for us, which is
So that's this project here. Cost about $500,000. But we actually utilize the parking lot to put panels on. And by putting the panels on them, I'm not talking about just setting them on the ground, obviously. I'm talking about actually creating shade structures for vehicles that could park underneath of them. So we don't lose parking space for when we want it or need it. We actually have added value because now the people that, that go to the pool or the Herc can actually have someplace shady to park, which I don't know about any of you, but I love parking in the shade in the summer here. My car gets really hot. So it's nice to not jump into a hot car after you've been swimming in the pool. And then having this, and this actually will completely offset the pool, which is pretty impressive considering how many pumps there are just to move water around in the pool system itself. And it's one of our, as far as our buildings and facilities go, it is actually our highest energy user, almost entirely because of how much water we use there. But this is also included in your packets. We talk a little bit about rooftop solar at the pool itself. So using this roof, and also put solar panels on here, on the Herc. So this could be something we can scale here. We can do one or both or all three projects, or we have that flexibility to move between different options at the same location.
Kelly, what would that, for the time, part of the year that the pool is not in operation, can that energy be utilized by the city for some other way?
I think you
Okay.
can.
When do you want to talk about that?
Yeah. So we talked about, that's the conversation we want to have with the Vistas. How can we transfer it from one meter to another? Is that a possibility?
It's something that would be part of that conversation, because we do have such varied capabilities at different locations. It would be highly beneficial if we could use an excess offset somewhere else at a different building. So for example, if we wanted to completely offset City Hall, but we don't have the physical space at City Hall, but we could add rooftop panels here in addition to parking structures, modular parking structures, then potentially we can offset 120% there, pick up an additional 20% here. So some of those offsets are some of the things that we really want to start to work through in this process of refining a solar implementation plan.
Oh, maybe? Okay. All right. Any last questions, last thoughts on buildings and facilities?
Is there some type of how long some solar energy can be stored? And there's a thing about putting them in batteries and holding them and then using them in the winter. The question really is there a certain period of time?
I don't think there's a certain period of time, but I also don't think I would recommend a battery storage. Partially because we need that reliability. We need to be able to turn the lights on when we need them on. And so we don't want to have to rely on that battery storage. I think generally the way the batteries work is that you charge them during the day and then you can use them throughout the night. But they don't think they necessarily store for long periods of time.
Yeah, I was only thinking about the issue of in terms of, like, for instance, the pool, and they may actually produce more energy than we need at that time. Question is, can that be used in the winter over at the Herd or someplace else?
Yeah, just to some extent, the way that it usually works is it runs the meter backwards, right? So you end up with this credit in the summer months where you have this, where you're producing more than you're using, and then that offsets in the winter.
So what it becomes
It's tied to the grid.
It becomes an accounting question, Maureen.
Yeah.
So we're offsetting energy that Avista has to produce, and so if they're not producing that amount, and we're able to bank the amount, it becomes an accounting question.
it's like a credit or debit,
That's
which
right.
is exactly what you're saying here.
And the pool actually there is some electrical use on that meter in the wintertime, because half the parking lot is actually on the pool's electrical meter. So there is still some energy that we would be able to draw out of that for the pool, even in the winter months.
Although I think also with time, people are working really hard to figure out how can you store solar. So, who knows
That's
at
one of
what
those-
point
And that
that
technology is
problem will be
evolving.
solved,
Yeah,
and then,
exactly,
yeah.
that's
The
exactly
battery
correct.
technologies evolve
Really
quickly.
quickly, yeah.
I had a quick question before we moved on. I had to do kind of a double take. There was under evaluated potential projects window replacement with an estimate of 51 megatons. Is that accurate? In comparison to
tons.
all the other projects, it looked like it was a really high amount, and I was wondering why it wasn't included as one of the recommendations.
It's definitely a project that we would love to pursue. One of the difficulties of window replacement is it just becomes a cost issue.
Yeah.
So the biggest facility that we would need to focus on is here at City Hall. And when you have a historic building with historic windows, it's not, we can't just, call up Moscow Building Supply and say, hey, we want 15 of these, let's do this thing. And so it's a pretty expensive project. And so there's some lower hanging fruit that we can pursue for less funds. And so the payback, you'll notice one of your columns there is your cost per metric ton that Kelly's broken that down into. And so that's why that goes into more of that aspirational category, Ann, is just because on some of the buildings, yeah, it's cake. It is a matter of just replacing a window with a window. But on a lot of the buildings that we'd have to focus on, this one in particular is a different story.
It just stood out to me because it was one of the highest numbers,
It
like
is.
top
Yeah,
10.
it's startling.
And part of the reason it wasn't included here is the data I had to estimate that was a lot less reliable.
Yeah,
So
Yeah,
I
this
stuck
is-
to projects for this that I had really good data for.
that makes sense.
Yeah, we didn't put in a lot of that time, because it's kind of just the planning, 30,000 planning.
Well, we know we need to be able to do these things in stages because of budget. If we had all our wish list and we could do it, and we had the money, holy smokes, it'd be great because we could go right after it. We don't have that luxury, so we need to be able to pick and choose. And the whole important thing is to keep plugging away and chipping away, and you don't ever give up on it, so we can move forward with what we're trying to attain.
All right. So with that, we'll move on to streetlights and traffic signals. So obviously, a lot of these things, we've already seen great reductions in this category. But this also includes, beyond the obvious, streetlights and traffic signals. This also includes any parking lot lights we have, any security or safety lighting in parks, and even the lights that shine on the signs as you're coming into town. That's all included in this sector. So with this one, we'll talk about our ball fields a little bit, and then, another potential expansion on that street light changeout. So this one's mid-level project. It costs a little bit more. It would take a little bit more time to get done. But to just change out our ball fields to LEDs. Right now, most of them are high-pressure sodium. Basically an incandescent bulb. And we, changing it out, we get up to like a 50 to 80% savings. So with just to show you what this looked like, I took through 2018 sports season for the fall, for the fields at Gormley. And we could see, we've got some night games in here where we had to use those lights. And running those same games, we see quite a drastic reduction in the amount of energy we use at that park. And there's really no reason we can't go to LEDs.
I have a process question here. So how does it work with our partnership with the Vista? Do they change out all lights, or are there some that we change out? How does it work?
We have some Avista-owned lights and we have city-owned lights. And so the lights that we own, then we have full responsibility for. Those are primarily, so as far as the street lights go in, those are the lights along the highway system belong to the city, and the lights in the downtown core are the cities. Most of the lights in the residential areas, we contract with Avista. So those lights belong to Avista, and we pay them for the operation and maintenance of those lights. And so Avista does the residential change out, and basically we have anything non-residential, so the highways in downtown.
So this falls under residential, this last slide, not this one, but.
This last slide could fall under both. And so we have the Cobra heads that go all along the highway and downtown, and so there's the potential on the lights that we own, but then a far greater number would be the residential that would be Avista's.
Thank
So,
you.
and for example, on page 13 of 26 in your packet, the LED conversion project, that would replace the city-owned streetlights, so that's in the capital CIP. And that would be for, I can't remember the whole scope, but I think it entailed downtown
Our
and.
downtown lights and our
And the highway lights.
highway
and
corridors.
yeah.
Yep.
Any that haven't been converted already.
Great. So anything we own, we're responsible for, and yeah.
Yeah, and we've initiated the LED change-out on those. We've made decent progress, but we still have many out there that need to be converted.
Thanks.
All right, so this one is kind of going taking that next step on streetlights. So adding some solar capability on the streetlights. We know that they're on every day for 11 to 12 hours every day. In the summertime, they could be producing enough electricity to run themselves. But I think the important piece that we're gonna have to look at when we look at these is making sure they are still grid tied. Because we do need them to come on. So we don't want them to, we don't want them to operate half the night because they weren't able to fully charge the battery during the day. Right, so we still want that grid tied capability. This is one of the newer projects I started looking at, so unfortunately I don't have a fun graph for you, but. All right. And that's all I've got for streetlights and traffic signals. Any thoughts on that before we move on?
I think so.
So the ball fields, you said, sorry, the ones like within the ball field are city, but along Mountain View? I didn't quite get that.
So the ball field lights are the cities. Any
Okay.
illumination inside the park property is the cities.
Okay.
But along Mountain View Road, that's Avistas.
Okay.
Yep. So when she had talked about the ball field lights, the example that she gave for Gormley Park is actually the ball field illumination. So the
big
lights that
ones.
light up the ball field to play with.
Okay.
And that's, but that brings a good point up too. You're talking about ball field lighting because our new facility off Joseph Field doesn't have those, but someday they may. And so of course, if we put those in, that's where we need to put the right ones in to start with.
That's right. Yeah.
Exactly. And then we don't have to have this conversation right now.
Well, there'll always be some kind of conversation, I can guarantee you that. But we'll move on, so.
Talking about something.
All right, so now we'll talk a little bit more about city fleet. Obviously, we have a very robust vehicle change-out schedule already for transitioning to hybrids and EVs where we can. And new technologies are evolving all the time for us to look at some of our heavier equipment. But that doesn't mean there's nothing more that we can do.
And I think this is one area where the messaging from the council is so important because it percolates down through the entire city organization. The messaging has been loud and clear for us to pursue this. And so a great example of this in the last year is that we started our transition of our police patrol vehicles to hybrids. There were a lot of police departments around the country that had a lot of trepidation about that and pushed back on that. Our police department was wonderful to work with, and we've got several of the hybrid models out on the street now, and the officers love them. And so that's just an example of that messaging actually having an impact as it works its way down through the city organization. Our departments have been absolutely great to work with through this. Kelly did a lot of work. We had to meet with each department, go through and talk about a lot of these things, and every single department has been very on board with trying to pursue ways to become more sustainable.
So with that, we were taking a look at our large area mowers, right? Parks is one of the few departments we've actually seen an increase in fuel use, and part of that's because we have more parks, which means we have more space we need to mow and take care of. All of that equipment is gas equipment. So what can we do to target that? Probably even as late as a year ago, a good electric mower for a large area just wasn't there. They didn't have the battery capacity, but now they do. And what's cool about this particular model that we found, this mean green mower, is that's what it's called. That's their actual brand, which I think is pretty cool. These actually can come with the option to put a solar roof on them, so they charge as you're going throughout the day.
Wow.
So you never have to worry about running out of battery power. One of the early problems with electric mowers, especially large area mowers that had to be out 8 hours a day, is their battery would start to deplete, and then they wouldn't be as efficient toward the end of the day. They just wouldn't do the job.
Kelly, now, are we looking, Tyler, and getting one of these now?
Well, so, yeah, I think this is a great area to highlight evolving technology. As I said, we've had to update our alternate fuel transition plan a couple times already, and it's for a great reason. It's because, oh my gosh, that's available. I mean, we have fully electric pickup trucks coming from Chevy and Ford in the next model year. That's just, if you told me that 5 years ago, I wouldn't have believed you. And so this is really cool. And as Kelly said, we've been keeping our eye on this because parks is an area where we've seen increased fuel use because of just the increased acreage of the park. It's just a simple math. And we did not have good options in this area. And so some of the areas we haven't had good options up to this point have been these kind of intense use equipment like a street sweeper, a grader, a snow plow, a mower. And so it's very encouraging to start to see this technology evolve enough that we can take a serious look at it. So our fleet department right now is working on getting a demo of one of these machines out so that our parks department can give it a try and see how it works. I mean, the thing that we always have to be careful with is we have a mission to complete. We have to get the job done. And so the parks department's mission is they've got to get through and maintain all of the areas that they have to maintain. And so it doesn't do them any good if we buy this and we feel good about them buying it, but they get halfway through a day and then they're stranded in the middle of a park somewhere. And so the fleet has to equip the department with the tools they need to do the job that they have to do. But it is really encouraging to see how quickly we're getting more and more options within the fleet. And so we look forward to continually having to update our alternate fuel transition plan.
Oh, we can get to that. I mean, I'd love to see a demonstration of this thing.
Yeah, I want to see it too.
We'll make sure we
mean-
send an invitation to the council when we get there.
Well, I think it's those are the types of things we need to be able to shout about and be very, very proud of. That's a big deal for
Well,
us.
for the first EV we ever demoed, Mr. Mayor, we had you driving
Yep.
right downtown in it.
And they wouldn't, and all now, full disclosure, they were very reluctant to let me drive because they know I go, I'm an A personality and I just go forward as fast as possible.
Those things have plenty of torque
And
to
so-
go forward fast as
So they
possible.
didn't, they were reluctant to give me the keys to that thing, but it really is nice.
It really is.
All right. So that's all I had for fleet, for vehicle fleet, city vehicle fleet at the moment. Any other thoughts on that?
Well, I got a quick question, Tyler. You talked about other, bigger dump trucks, road graders, these types of things. We're getting closer and closer to the evolution of those too. Is that correct?
Yeah, I was before COVID shut the world down in 2019, I attended an annual Public Works conference, and they have a very big equipment show at this conference. And at that show, there was a battery-packed vehicle that could be equipped with different modules to do a number of different things, including sweeping and snow plowing. And it was something that was highly aspirational, especially for a city our size. Somebody like New York City may be able to take a flyer just on a PR front, but it was way too expensive for us. But just the fact that somebody was manufacturing it, it's kind of like the fashion show. It's like if it shows up on the runway, eventually it's going to make us in some form or another that we can actually access.
Well, the thing about that, the more they produce these things, the longer it goes, the more affordability they will become. They may not be affordable for us now. At some point in the future, they will be. And those are the sort of things that we all have to keep in mind. As we go along, and we're going to chip away on this, this is part of this process. And I use this this analogy, and everybody's heard me say it, it's like eating an elephant, one bite at a time. We're never going to get up. We're like the piranhas out there biting away on these things. And we need to continue to do that as we go along. So we may not be able to do that, something like that right now, but who knows, in 3 years or 4 years or 5 years, it may become a reality, and I bet it will be, because they're going to make these things, and as they go along, it's like anything else, the price will come down because they'll get better and better at it, and they'll produce more of them.
Absolutely, Mr. Mayor. One of the things we've tried to do, we're small enough and we're strapped for resources enough that we don't have the option to really swing and miss, especially on a large piece of equipment. We don't get to take a flyer on a sweeper that nobody's really tried out, because we can't have that impact. We can't absorb that impact on our budget if it goes belly up and it doesn't work out. We just can't. But we try and make up for that by doing our research and aggressively talking to people who've done it. I think a good example of that is our hot water weed control. That was we were the first ones in the whole region to do that. It took a lot more research. We spent a lot of time on the phone with people in Europe and Canada talking to them about it. We got on the phone with the only place in the U.S. that we could find, which was the University of Boulder, and at University of Colorado in Boulder, and had a lot of conversations. And so we made up for it with our homework, and we were able to make that decision with conviction because we knew it would work. And so that's really what we try and do, is stay aggressive, but be cautiously aggressive, so that we can be on the forefront of this stuff, but also not miss with our limited funds. And so that's really the sweet spot for us, is something that we can gain the confidence that it is going to work for the application that we need. But we don't want to be the last people to adopt something and wait until it's just, past A technology. We try and stay in front of it.
So Tyler, you're saying that you revamped the documents supporting all of this and reworked the calculations. What do you hear about the potential for hydrogen fuel cell technology, which plays in nicely with our hydropower here in the Northwest by way of a zero carbon energy source for some of the heavier equipment?
There's a lot of talk in the heavy equipment circles, Councilman Betke, that shows a lot more potential because of the energy concentration that you can get out of that, and that's been part of the problem with the electric. The battery technology is getting a lot better, a lot quicker, and so you have two schools of thought within the large equipment. There's people that say, your large semi-trucks, excavators, et cetera, are more likely to go hydrogen. Some of them think the battery technology will come up. It kind of almost feels like the DVD versus HD, whatever, Blu-ray, like that competition at this point where I'm not really sure how that'll shake out, but it's an encouraging technology, and there are certainly people that are making headway with that.
So it sounds like you want to go to another conference and look it over.
We're gonna have some homework to do.
So can you tell me, right now, when we're looking at our fleet, is it mainly, when we're making improvements, is it the hybrid models that we're looking at, or are we looking at going all electric?
Wherever we can go, we get as aggressive as we can
Yeah.
get. So for example, our police cruisers are hybrid for several reasons. We need that ability to kick over to a gas engine if they need to kick over to a gas engine. But most of our light vehicle fleet is targeted for full electric. And so we're talking inspection vehicles, even our half-ton pickups that are just going around. So our light fleet, almost every unit within the light fleet is targeted for electric.
And so with that, how many charging stations do we need to help with that?
Quite a few. We actually, Carl, our fleet supervisor, is working on a comprehensive charging plan for all city facilities. He's got a map that he's generated, and he's working with Avista so that we can look at the power capabilities. An example is Bill Belknap with the Community Planning and Design building that is being put. That's included in the design that they're having done to accommodate the charging infrastructure that they'll need for their inspection vehicles. As the council knows, we included the conduits at the police station to accommodate their administrative fleet going over and parking fleet going over to all EV. We already have several EV chargers at different city facilities, including the water building, the WRF. So we already have these in place. That's definitely part of the plan and something that is part of this process.
And then one last tail onto that, and I swear I'm not trying to trip you up, Kelly, I'm just curious if you've researched this part or not. But I know that there are some new laws people are trying to put together, like the gas tax for gas vehicles, to find different ways to do charging for electrical facilities. Have you researched that at all? And if you haven't, that's totally understandable, but do we know any information?
I might be able to, if you got anything on that?
Nope, I don't.
So there is a lot of talk right now about transportation funding on both the state level and on the federal level. I'm part of a committee on the federal level for the American Public Works Association where we review that legislature, and that's one of the committees I'm on is for the transportation. So we're really taking a look at what that looks like and what the funding mechanisms for the future are. There are a couple pilots that are out there. They call them VMT, vehicle miles traveled fees, rather than a gallon of gas. It's how much you're actually traveling. Oregon's got a pilot that's been in place, I think, now for almost 2 years. And so it certainly seems like it's trending in that direction. And then as that funding, the gas tax never kept up with the infrastructure needs. And so the real goal right now is to try and get a method and a mechanism that actually keeps up and keeps our nation's transportation infrastructure well maintained. And so it seems like it's going in that direction, and that would certainly fund the transportation needs of the future. There's not a ton of clarity right now on how that works out. The infrastructure bill is looking a little bit more positive on the federal level. Our local senator, David Nelson, this escapes me. He's actually on the Transportation Commission at the state, on the Transportation Committee, and he's done a lot of just yeoman's work in that area and has really tried to push that in a good direction. So we're hopeful that in the next few years something comes of that.
That also ties into grants and different things that we're going to, availability of those as they come forward. Gina, you had something.
And this might be just a dumb idea, so I'm just going to throw it out there and you can tell me no, or tell me wait, because maybe it's later on. What about wind? Is there any role for that in our future?
So wind is something that we looked at with, as part of this process, we took a really comprehensive look. Wind is much harder to get to pencil out than solar. it just because of the greenhouse gas inputs to the infrastructure that it takes
Okay.
for the wind generation. The one place where we may have the potential as more of an aspirational project to get wind to pencil out might be at the water reclamation reuse facility. Out there on that western corridor, we've got some open space. That if the technology evolves to a point where we can get a more efficient energy production out of that without such energy intensive production of the equipment, then that would be something that maybe would pencil out. But the solar is just so much better bang for our buck that kind of, is there anything you'd add to that, Kelly?
There is actually, like, in the packet,
There's a
in
project
the
in there.
evaluated potential projects, I did include some wind in there. If you want to just kind of see how that pencils out. It really doesn't, for a 10 kilowatt system, we only get like a 3 metric ton per year savings.
Yeah, it's not.
So it's just really not very,
Well,
Yeah.
and it's smart to go for the biggest bang for your bucks, what
Yeah,
we're looking at,
makes
right?
good
I mean, that's
sense.
really kind of how we have to do this too.
What about, super aspirational? I don't, I had talked with someone from Avista about this quite a while ago when I was a thing there, but like they did in Lind, like an actual power generating wind farm, like maybe south of town, and if there ever is a Southeast Industrial URA district, and I know you have to convince them that they should do that here, basically, but it generates power for our community. I don't,
Yeah, Vista,
yeah,
Vista partnered
Yeah,
with that private company
inland.
with the understanding that they would provide Vista with that energy.
right.
So
I mean,
that's
Yeah, in the kind of our super aspirational list, I think one of the things we really want to do, Randy, is take a look at that sequestration side so that we can, because what might end up being more of an aspirational that becomes more realistic project down the road is, say, for example, to deal with temperature at the water reclamation reuse facility, we say, okay, we have X amount of water. Maybe it becomes realistic for the city to buy a property and plant a bunch of trees and water it with that water during those hot months or something like that. And then we get the sequestration impact, and it could be that sequestration impact has a lower carbon footprint than the installation of all that wind for what we produce. And so that might have a better balancing impact. At this point, we still have enough lower hanging fruit and really defining that balance point that we want to hit, that we haven't gone into a ton of detail with that stuff, but it is stuff we've been brainstorming about. It's like, okay, if we get to that point, how do we get over the edge? How do we make those two things line up?
I think it's worth noting too, when we start talking about a large scale wind project like that, with the big fans, if you will, it gets into more of a community-wide aspect, because even the city, that's beyond city operations to be able to use all that energy, so.
yeah, and I think we'd have to be able to demonstrate that the community, there would be buy-in for it at an individual resident level.
All right, so employee commute. This obviously is just what it sounds like. It's the amount of driving that our employees do to get to and from work. And this is, of all the sectors in this inventory, I think this is the one that most people have the most roadblocks in their brain. We are a pretty rural community. A lot of our employees live outside of town. So how can we incentivize that when we don't have a lot of this public transportation infrastructure? So we'll talk a little bit about that. So obviously, quick win is to continue with this telecommuting that we've learned to do so well through 2020. If there's one good thing we've learned, is that we've learned that we can actually function as a city and get a lot of work done, even if we're not always in the building every day. So just to give you an idea what that actually breaks down to, in 2008, I have 2018 numbers here. So this is from our calculated emissions, and then the difference between 2020. So we have almost a 30% reduction in almost all of these.
Okay, now, Kelly, I want you to make sure, and take all the time you want, because I'm gonna have you go through it twice.
Okay.
Real slow, because this is one of the things that I love to see, and everybody in our community needs to be able to see, because this is a big deal.
Yes. Not all of this can be attributed to telecommuting, obviously. We do have improved, we have more hybrids that people are driving, we have more EVs that are
Walking,
driving. We
biking.
have walking and biking is included in this as well. But I think it's really important to see this difference, especially since we look down here at our average daily miles. Our average daily miles for our employees in 2018 was 20 miles. This last year is 23. So we've increased the amount of the distance that our employees are having to come in from work because of where they live or whatever. But we're still seeing this drastic reduction, which is mostly attributed to our telecommuting in 2020.
There's a really interesting aspect of this that I'd like to point out. I mean, one is just, that the telecommuting impact and being able to strategically utilize that in ways that, one, can help with retention, can help us with recruiting, the workplace flexibility, where appropriate. Obviously, we have a lot of positions in the city where, our water operators aren't going to be telecommuting. They're not fixing a lot of water leaks over Zoom. But, but it is interesting, and Councilwoman Truccio has been deep into this, but this is a little bit indicative of our housing affordability issue. Like we have employees living further and further away, and largely, I would, this isn't correlated or anything, but I would think that could definitely be, that affordability would be one of the contributing factors to that. We have employees going further and further out in order to be able to find a place to buy. But despite that increased distance, seeing that, we didn't gain a whole ton of vehicle efficiency in those 2 years. There's not a big percentage of that can be attributed. Your 2018 Honda Civic isn't that much more efficient or less efficient than your 2020 Honda Civic. So, the real impact was that telecommuting.
And really, we didn't see a drastic increase in the number of hybrids or EVs either. I mean, it went from 1 EV in 2018 to 2 in 2020.
Well,
So, we've seen more of them, but it's not.
Double, 100% more.
Yeah, 100% increase. So that is there, but it's not the main factor.
So if we
here.
look at something like the gas vehicle miles, and part of that comes down to the fact that so many people, we were in the middle of a pandemic for a year.
Right.
And so the answer is people weren't driving. The question is this premised upon the idea that people are going to continue to work from home?
Well, that's kind of this quick win, is that we want to see if there are ways that we can be flexible enough for people to work from home.
Well, we're
whether
gonna-
it's
we're
whether it's
continuing that
full-time or
process.
even hybrid.
Yep.
We do have, even down the road, when we go back to normal, we've already been able to identify that, where we very well will have that in place. And it's about thinking a little bit differently and thinking out of the box. And it doesn't matter if it's city employees, any employee anywhere within town that has done this, or as far as that goes nationwide, because this paradigm shift that's happened for us, we've realized there's things we can do that we never did before because we didn't have something that we faced. Now, out of the bright side of COVID is something like this that developed so that we can look at this and think a little bit differently. And my view, it's wonderful.
You're right, Mr. Mayor.
Not COVID, but being able to, a few of the positive process, let's take a few wins from this thing.
It's a new thing for us in the public sector. The private sector has, been a bit ahead of us on this, but
Yeah.
it took some getting used to in the public sector. But as Mayor Lambert said, we have employees now that their positions are not temporarily remote, they're permanently remote. We have permanently remote employees at this point. We've analyzed the positions, we write very strict job descriptions, we have very strict means of accountability. So we make sure that it's something that we can make sure that the work that needs to be getting done is getting done. But, it saves on commute, it saves on potential office space down the road as the city grows. If that offsets office space, it's a place we're not heating, a place we're not cooling. All of those different aspects that go into it. So it definitely can play a role.
Are you, we talked about, Jen did earlier at her presentation to Administrative Committee, just travel, so travel for conferences and things like that, flights. Is that built into, is this accounted for somewhere?
That would be, if anywhere, that would be included in vehicle fleet, just because, when we send it, at least locally, we usually try to send them.
Flights would not be, though.
Flights
We
was
have
not
not
accounted
accounted
for.
for flights. So
Okay.
vehicle fleet, if they take a city vehicle, it would be accounted for there, Brandy.
Uh-huh.
But city travel otherwise is not accounted for.
Okay,
Yeah.
I guess I figure you're just figuring the emissions aren't happening in the city, I guess that's the,
It could be an interesting factor to take a look
Yeah.
at, though. Yeah.
All right, any other questions on this slide? Okay.
He
All right.
wanted you to go over it again, I think.
Well, that's okay. I think we covered, I wanted to, The reason I said that is I wanted to stop and make it a big deal for all of us, because we had a great conversation in my view on that, but everybody gets the gist of that, and oh man, do I love graphs like that and charts, oh my God. And I'm a numbers guy, I love that sort of thing, love it, because they don't lie, you know?
This one might lie a little bit.
Okay, well,
All right, so now we're on to our alternative transportation incentive. I put this as a mid-level partially because, most of it to develop a plan would be staff time, right? So that's pretty cheap. But looking at what this would actually look like, it could take so many different pathways, right? So in 2018, we actually asked as part of our employee commute survey, what, if anything, could persuade you to use some alternative form of transportation? We left it pretty open as far as what that meant. Obviously, some people came down to money. You pay me, you offer me some sort of monetary incentive. Some of them, it was like time off of work would be an incentive. Those are all included in there. I was surprised at the number of people that said if they had a better bus option, they would consider the bus. Like, I would probably take the bus from Pullman if the bus from Pullman still existed.
Does that mean expanded routes or a better
Some of it-
bus?
Some of it came with better routes, because we
Okay.
only do have the 2 fixed routes in Moscow.
So far.
So expanded route service, or some of them said a bus stop closer to my house, which again is part of that bus route availability. I was just surprised at the number of responses that kind of fit into that category. I just looked, these were pretty open-ended. They were open-ended questions. There was no specific things they could ask. So this is just what I was able to pull out kind of visually from the responses.
And probably, I wonder if you did this, like in the last 3 months, if people had said, let me work from home. Because maybe when this came out, that wasn't even a thought.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we
Yeah, this was
didn't,
pre.
and we didn't
pre-COVID,
ask,
yeah.
and we didn't
Yeah.
ask this question on our 2020 survey. We wanted to know more about how many days they didn't drive into work for that survey, so.
Oh, yeah.
I want to ask it again, but in a little bit more specific way, so I can get some better data out of it.
Yeah.
Some of them came down to flexibility. If they had the flexibility to maybe start a little bit later, they might consider walking or biking to work. Or if they had the flexibility to align their schedule with somebody else's that they could carpool with, that came in there. The carpool matching, those were people that said, I would carpool, but I don't have anybody that lives near me. There was one that said they used to use the van pool, but it's no longer available. So those are those sorts of things that we can take a look at again and see if there's something that makes sense. When I was talking to my sister through this process, her and I came up with this thought, like, if I got one extra floating holiday a year, like, I would probably bike to work 30 days out of the year. Right? Just for an extra 8, an extra free day off. So that, it doesn't necessarily have to be something so strictly, walking or biking or carpooling, which are our big transportation options, being as rural as you are. It can be something that's really flexible and could it could look all kinds of different ways.
This one becomes a little bit of a hard nut to crack for us because, in some urban areas, it's as simple as, hey, we'll give everybody free transportation passes. The city, as a city employee, you get a transportation pass. For us, since we have a small, pretty concentrated city where nobody's more than, generally 1.5 miles from their workplace if they live in town, but then we have a large percentage of employees that aren't able or don't live in town that are quite a bit further out, but then inherently they're spread out a lot. It's not just like, one suburb where 10 of them are coming from. It's, Viola, Troy, Bowman, Genesee. And so it becomes a little bit more difficult just because of the nature of that. The people that are really close have, they might be really attracted to a walking, biking sort of incentive, but then you have a big percentage of folks that may live out of town where your options might be more limited about what they might or might not be able to do. And so we think this is an area where we can apply some creativity and come up with some different ideas of, maybe it's just some really simple programs to try and incentivize and motivate people to shift behaviors.
Looking at the new NRS building, they have a whole space inside there just for bicycles, and they have a little stand there for bicycle repairs, and there's a whole incentive in terms of what NRS has done to try and encourage people to use their bikes.
Yes, some of the things that places have done is just, in having a shower and locker room facility, so that somebody who does bike in from further away. We had Mike Dimmick, who was a previous employee of the water department, for a while there, he was cycling in from Troy. And one of the hard things for him was he needed to be able to jump in, take a shower when he got to work.
Yeah.
And so that can really have an impact.
Maybe we can work with some of our partners too, to do, I'm thinking better bus options. Maybe it's as simple as a easier to read schedule, but then also
Well-
maybe it is something as extreme as another route or three.
Well, we have looked at a third round, and that's
Yeah.
is very much in the works, and of course, with everything kind of flubbed itself last year, but we're moving forward with
pandemic.
that, so that third route is very doable. I think we're gonna see that
Yep.
not
Next
too
couple of
long down the
years.
future for us.
And sometimes it's just as simple as having it available will
Yep.
shift behaviors.
And I wonder with the carpooling one, I mean, you might not know that there's someone else
Yeah, and
in
that's
Troy
why
that
it could
also
be
has the
something
same
so
schedule.
simple as a carpool matching type program on the internet.
Right.
Yeah, just some sort of posting
Yeah.
board where you
Well,
say,
and
hey.
they-
But then
that's
that
where
does
you're at and you
accomplish
want
the
to.
drop in cost if they're sharing the expense of gas because they're alternating, I mean, it's just
Well,
like,
and
you know,
that drop in
carpooling
cost
for
sector
soccer
was
or
actually,
whatever.
there were several people that said they would move to town if it was cheaper. So that gets into
Oh.
that housing affordability. Some of them mentioned they would consider like an EV or a hybrid if it was cheaper to get. There was one person said if the city bought me a $2,000 e-bike, I would ride it to work. But I mean, but the cost of those are coming down too, because they're in higher demand. So those are those things, some of that's shifting without us, and we can hopefully incentivize that to realize that savings.
If the city buys me roller skates, I know what I'm doing.
We're all not getting near you.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm getting a concussion, that's what I'm doing.
I'm getting run over.
All right. So now we'll talk about our electric vehicle charging stations, which we touched on quite a bit earlier, as when we talked about our city vehicle fleet. But when I was looking at this from an employee commute sort of view, I found that ChargePoint, who is, these are their charging stations, and we've worked with them to try and get some established along our highway corridors, is they actually did a survey with a Fortune 500 company, and they actually found that 60% of employees would consider switching to an EV if they had charging availability at work. I think that's especially important for us because we do have that rural piece to this, right? A lot of our employees do live outside of town. So having charging infrastructure at work that they can access, I think will be a game changer as far as our employee commute. And additionally, I found that Marin County, which I think is in California, they have charging infrastructure. They charge $1 for the public to use, $1 per hour to charge, but they actually charge their employees only 50%, or 50 cents. So, I mean, there's that added. And what's really cool about these two is the technology is evolving just as rapidly as the EVs are. There's a company in California that makes these that are completely solar and mobile. So you could pick them up and move them to a new parking spot, and they can charge up to four vehicles at once. I thought those would be a really cool addition to something like a Saturday market. We can roll them out, put them out for our farmers or our visitors to the farmer's market, and then we can pick them up and move them out of the way when they no longer make sense to be there. So those are the kinds of things that, we're gonna see that as we move forward with this too.
And those are the kind of ideas that we need to facilitate and constantly think of and work on, and that's how we get some of the best ideas come through things like this. I mean,
Not that I don't have trust in some of our state and federal government folks, but I guess one of the things I worry about has to do with also the new changing and evolving things, or how in the heck can they restrict them and add to them and make it harder to put these things up. And well, I mean, I love this. I love all those ideas. I also have this little thing in the back of my head saying, and 5 years from now, are they going to make us get rid of all these because we have to go to this certain spot and this is the only place we can charge? So I worry about that aspect of the new and evolving part, but not.
I totally, I definitely understand what you're saying, Sandra. I do think the ship has sailed with electric vehicles. I mean, when you've got General Motors saying that by 2035 they won't produce another internal combustion engine, that ship sailed.
Yeah.
It's coming.
I know it's coming, I'm worried that they're gonna regulate only places where we can charge up. That's all I mean by that, because I think everyone knows they are coming, so.
And they might do that, but maybe because I live in Washington, so I get to see a whole different kind of regulations and things. I think their bigger thing is they're gonna have to figure out, from that transportation aspect we talked about earlier, so they're gonna have to figure out how they can make money off of it, so they
Yeah.
can still support the road infrastructure. I know Washington did it by passing this huge licensing tax for licensing your vehicle. I think it's since been repealed, but that was their, kind of their first attempt at recouping that cost they're no longer seeing from the gas tax. So, I think, for me personally, I think that's more what I would worry about from
Thank you.
charging stations.
Something new to worry about, Senator.
I know, right?
Maureen?
So, I remember, this was probably 5 years ago, so things could have evolved by there, but I remember staying someplace, and every one of those said Tesla on it. And I was just curious if Tesla makes charging stations that are unique and different than all other charging vehicles, and so that you have to have theirs, and I'm seeing someone say yes. I mean, somehow we have to figure out how to get a universal charge. Like, you get to go to a gas station and, you know, you have 3 choices. They're right there.
They've become fairly universal. Tesla had their supercharger network that they deployed when there just wasn't any other chargers out. So they deployed their own network so that drivers of their vehicles could still drive around the country. And so that's largely what that was their own supercharger network when they really were one of the only viable EVs on the market. Most of the electric vehicles coming out now are not proprietary. They have a consistent charging port, and you can use almost any charger on them.
Thank you.
Kind of like your cell phone,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Every cell phone you bought, you know, when
Had
they
a
were
di-
first coming out, had a different style charger on it. And now they're almost all USB-C or USB-B,
Yeah.
depending on what, or iPhone. They're still special.
Question.
Oh, yeah, solid waste.
Now we're on solid waste. So this one should be pretty quick. It's only one, 2 quick wins. All right, so 2 quick wins. Updating our sustainable purchasing guideline. The original one was written and published in 2007, and it hasn't been updated since. Obviously, what the city buys and what the city needs has changed a lot since 2007. So taking a harder look again about what we purchase, how we purchase, why we have to purchase certain things, and finding ways that we can reduce what we have to buy means we're throwing less away. With that comes improved waste tracking. How much are we throwing away? Are we really needing the size of containers that we have at city facilities? How do we determine that size? Can we reduce those with reduced waste? And a lot of that comes down to waste audits. So this waste audit was done at the farmer's market in 2016. Obviously, a city facility like City Hall is going to have a drastically different matrix of things that's thrown away. We probably won't have near as many compostables, for example. But if we can look at, you know, what we're throwing away, if it's something that's being purchased and bought as a one-time use item repeatedly, is there a sustainable option where we're not having to throw it away? So looking at those kinds of things as part of this purchasing guideline update, I think is really smart. And then through this process, if we find that all of a sudden we've reduced our waste enough that we don't need a 6-yard container at the shop and we can reduce it down farther, then let's do that. It saves the city money, and it also improves the data that I have to calculate this.
Kelly, is your data, is it based on the size of a container or is it the weight?
It's based on the size of the container.
And
It's
you get
assumed to
that-
be full. Every
It's
time
assumed
it's
to
done,
be
it's
full.
assumed to be full.
And you get that from LSI, like, let's say the commercial accounts, they just tell you the size of their dumpster.
Yep.
So we get the size of the dumpster, we assume it to be full every time it's picked up, and then we assume a universal weight of 350 pounds per yard.
So it's a lot of averages that go into that game, and so by refining the numbers that we have and then refining the processes by which those are filled up, like Kelly said, we can right-size the waste stream coming out of the building, therefore right-size the dumpster, or the solid waste facility at the building, and then it's cheaper and saves us greenhouse gas, and we have a more accurate calculation of what we're actually putting out.
Well, what you're actually putting out, what you really want to know is the weight. Okay.
Yep.
But considering most city facilities are picked up twice a week, that's a lot too. And we don't have a real accurate
Right.
way to weigh that every
Yeah.
time it's picked up. Hence the averages.
Yep.
Jim, you?
You're going to hear me say recycling about 100 times tonight, sorry.
That's okay.
But I haven't been sleeping much, and so I think about stuff like that at 2 in the morning. How can we ever have it be okay? I mean, I feel like not only is it expensive for us to recycle, but then it seems like even that end process isn't exactly moving towards carbon neutrality either. So how do we make recycling a part of our lives again? I mean, that is a sustainable practice, right? So what happens?
We've done, as this council knows, we've had a lot of tumult in the recycling industry since 2018. It's just been chaos. And I think personally for the good ultimately, because it kind of pulled back the curtain on just a lot of misnomers that we all had about where things were going and what the ultimate impact was. We all felt really good because we chucked it in the right color bin and felt like we were doing the right thing and kind of ignoring the more important of reduce, reuse, and thinking that we did it all by recycling. It is settling out a little bit as far as the industry goes. For the first time I've heard conversations on the federal level about building up our domestic infrastructure for recycling, which really could have an impact. We're not just shipping it over and dumping it in China or Indonesia or some other country and forgetting about it. And so that could have a pretty significant impact. And there's also a lot of movement on the packaging side, which for the first time we're seeing legislation start to happen on the packaging side, which is, to me, pretty critical in this process.
I agree.
Kelly has worked with Tim Davis, our sanitation manager, to get some really good numbers dialed in on our recycling program. And so that's something that we really want to focus on. We're treading water a little bit while we see we don't want to have a knee-jerk reaction to something. You've seen municipalities just cutting their recycling program, just cutting it out. And these are programs that cost a lot of money to get propped up. And so we thought, okay, we don't want to have a knee-jerk reaction, drop recycling entirely because it's costing a little bit more, and then a year and a half later, things settle out and we're like, oh crap, we wish we had a recycling program. And so we've got it to a point where we can have a sustainable program. We're treading water right now. I think in the next 2 years we'll have a far better idea for where that lands. I tend to think personally that what we call the OG recyclables, cardboard, tin, aluminum, that they're going to win out. But there's going to be a hard look at plastics and some of the other things that we used to think we were recycling that we really weren't. And so I know that's a really wishy-washy answer, but
it's a real one. And I think in the meantime, we can do sustainable purchasing practices and things like that I get that.
And that's part of the city's choice to do that reduce and reuse segment.
And I think that really goes along with what Kelly's saying about the sustainable purchasing guideline. Really just taking a hard look at what are we bringing into the house that therefore we're having to throw out and make sure that we're doing that efficiently.
Yeah.
So one quick question on that. Downstairs at the vending machine, do we know, are those plastic bottles or the aluminum cans?
They're aluminum cans down there,
Are
I
they?
think.
Cool. Nice job. I love that you knew that. Well done.
I bought them enough from there, that's why.
So we're now in the middle of this tree trimming process, right? And they're going around trimming everyone's trees that haven't trimmed their trees, and then they mulch all the wood in there. Do we as a city use that on some of our sustainable places?
Okay.
Yeah, we do. We take our biosolids from the wharf out to LSI, where that yard waste is mixed with the biosolids and treated in a process. It's called aerobic digestion out there, aerobic composting. So there's rules that govern that, but yeah, they produce about 4,000 tons worth of beneficial compost, and that's land applied throughout the county.
And it's really popular. I mean, they never have any trouble getting rid of it.
Here
People
several
love
years
that
ago,
stuff.
we took a tour of that. Maureen, you might very well be interested. It's a pretty amazing thing.
If any of you are interested in a tour, we could easily arrange that.
I was going to ask about that. It's not food grade, right?
No.
But you still have a really high demand for it. I was curious. So looking at this, recognizing that this is the farmer's market, I just look at that big yellow wedge there.
Yeah, so this audit was done as a first step to working on creating some kind of composting program
Excellent.
for the farmer's market. It's been super slow to actually get going, but there's a lot of pieces that we need to look at to make sure that we're doing it right.
Do you envision that that could be a pilot program of sorts? Like this could ever be curbside?
We
or
are
is it too early to tell?
currently working with, so Tim Davis and I have been in conversations with Lake Tahoe Sanitation about a pilot program that we would love to run, focusing initially on restaurants. Is, you just get so much, you can get so much food waste through that. And so it's something we hope to do. We've had some encouraging discussions about it. There are some initial things, there's some things that we still have to work through. We're always at that awkward point where we're small enough that the volume is a little bit harder to get to work out, and to make it pencil out. But I'm cautiously optimistic that in the next couple of years, we may be coming to council with a proposal for a pilot on that.
That's exciting. Thank you.
That's good.
Okay.
Well, I have one other, with the roll carts are probably similar too. What I was asking about the dumpsters, but just the residential roll carts. I mean, would it be worth just saying, if you have one of the large ones and you realize you're never using it, downgrade to a smaller one because it's cheaper? Because, I mean,
That's that same concept, taking our dumpsters and,
exactly, you're
there's,
counting it as the large volume, but maybe then people just need a reminder that they can trade out for a smaller one if they're not really filling that because it's being counted as full.
Absolutely. But to clarify,
this is just.
those
city
are not
facilities.
included in this number.
Oh, okay, okay.
Because that's the residents,
Right.
and so that's not city
Oh,
generated
right,
stuff.
yeah, yeah.
We're
of
just talking
course,
about
yeah.
just the
Right.
waste at,
Yeah,
used at
right.
city facilities.
Got it, okay. And I also just noticed, well, like, way in the beginning, that I feel like we can talk about this a really long time, but it only accounted for 3% of the
Yeah,
whole
it's-
deal.
Yeah, it's not a
And
huge
even though
contributor.
our emissions from it went up, that only accounted for 0.8%
Yeah,
of everything, so.
it's a small
Yeah,
sector
it's
for
It's
the
a
city.
small a small piece.
think we
but
all
it's-
have our, like,
It's
our
one of those,
ideas, but-
we take it where we can get it. If we can do it easily,
Yeah.
why not do it? Any little bit helps.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I think we identified an issue in this category that we can rectify pretty easily, so
Yeah.
those quick wins.
All right, so let's talk water and wastewater. This is our biggest energy user across the whole city. And I've only covered 2 projects with this, just because this is also a harder one to tackle, because we have to provide these services. We have to use the energy to provide the services, but can we do it smarter? We've already seen some ways that we can and have, but what else can we do? So first, we are actually going to be participating in the Department of Energy SWIFT program. I forget what that stands for. Just give me a second.
It's one of those great federal government acronyms that we're not going to be able to define for you right now, but just trust us. It's a
so-
program from the Department of Energy.
And really, it stands for something that doesn't match with the letters they chose.
Always
So
waste something.
it's Sustainable Wastewater of the Future is what that acronym is supposed
go,
to
look
be
at her
standing
go.
for.
Sustainable Wastewater Infrastructure Accelerator.
Yeah,
Wow.
is the actual program.
The accelerator fit in.
So what we're hoping to get out of this is in this graph, you'll see that I took our calculator energy intensity. So this is the amount of kilowatt hours we use per million gallons we treat. And since 2005, we've actually seen this upward trend, which is weird because we've been doing energy efficiency projects out there. We have been operating in a way that we think is energy efficient. So we're trying to figure out why this is happening. And we're hoping that this program will not only help us find out why and find us those little quick, easy things we can do to reduce that, but also to find us some of those bigger, more aspirational projects, maybe to look at new technologies that we're not aware of specifically for wastewater infrastructure. So this is a free program for us. They give us something like 10 technical hours to help us look at this.
And they have some software, pretty advanced software that looks at a lot, that's very specific to wastewater treatment. That's really nice because we can input a lot of our data into it and it can run some analyses and really help us dial in where we might find more efficiencies. And so we're pretty excited about being able to participate in this.
Yeah,
How
and
long
there's-
will it take to be able to analyze that?
It's gonna be about a 3-year program.
So over the period of 3 years, we'll be able to see a graph that will tell us if this thing is working for us or not.
That's right. We'll be able to know where we can make the most improvements and kind of focus our efforts in the right areas at that facility.
Yeah, it is kind of mysterious because we've also been in the water conservation program with reduce toilet flushes, shower heads, things like that.
Less
So
water
in theory,
use.
there should be less water going through there,
Well,
so.
and that might be partly what's leading to this increase in energy intensity, because if we're not using less energy to treat the now less amount of water that's coming in, we're gonna
So it'll
see
give you a
more
higher
kilowatt
number.
hours
So it
per
could be a
million
math
gallons treated.
thing.
Because, yeah,
So it
because
could
the
actually be
facilities
on
has
that
to run.
end, but
That's
then
why
how do
we
we,
find.
how do we adjust that to make it match?
I like that.
So,
Yeah.
and then aspirational. So how do we produce enough solar to help offset one of these? A 25 kilowatt hour system, which is what kilowatt system, which is what is in your packet for this, actually only offsets about 1% of the energy that we use at the wharf. We don't really even have the space to put a 25 kilowatt system out at the wharf. The one place in here that looks like we could do it, I personally am hesitant to put it there, even if it's in the distant future. This is eventually going to be another treatment bay. So I personally think it's kind of irresponsible to put something there, even if it's 80 years in the future, that we'd have to rip all that
Oh,
infrastructure out.
yeah, no, that's dumb.
So I'd rather look at things, I mean, we can put solar, of course, on the roofs of all of our buildings out there. And then that becomes, they're so spread out, how do we get that energy back to the meter? So then we have to look at trenching all the way to wherever the meter is. So this is kind of where we've talked a little bit about wind with this facility, just because wind does have a smaller on-the-ground footprint that we can look at. But this also brings up, can we do something like a partnership with U of I? They've got land right next to us.
Yeah.
Maybe we can partner with them on some kind of array.
And it was kind of interesting, because I was thinking about that, and I thought, geez, because the university is right there, and I bet we would really work through something with them. We could come
And
up
they
with
do-
something, a collaborative effort that would help the university out as well as the city. I think there's something that we really need to investigate.
Go ahead, Maureen.
So one of the things I find kind of discouraging is that it costs too much money to use solar right now, or to buy solar for the new police department, right? And so we didn't do that. And so as we start talking about solar, I'm wondering, how do we balance on, we said no because it's too expensive, and, other projects that are going to be solar, are they going to be less expensive because they're not as big?
I think it ultimately comes down to size. But the encouraging thing is, we can start with a small size and then scale it. So if we wanted to do 4 new panels a year on one building until we fill the roof, that might be an option.
And in addition to that, that new police station's going to have the infrastructure to be able to put solar on it as we go along, even though we can't afford it right now. We're putting that infrastructure piece in there, Maureen, so that down the road we can do it.
Right, so but I guess the answer is, following up with what Kelly just said, it seems to me that if you say, okay, let's put 4 panels in there, just like we've got it all set up for it, but if we kind of have a plan that says we're going to do 4 this year, 4 next year, and you build it into your budget, it may be a way of doing it.
Yes.
And I think that's really what we'd like to do is moving forward, is much like we've done with the alternate fuel transition plan, is to come up with a solar transition plan where the council directs staff to take a really hard look at those things and prioritize and say, okay, where's the biggest bang for our buck? How much does it cost? And we have a really well thought through, prioritized program that then the council can consider as part of a capital project. And they can say, okay, we want to program this in, and, in looking at this, we feel like the best bang for our buck, the cutoff's right here. And so let's plug these projects into the capital program, and then we can have a really thoughtful implementation.
And that goes, what that does, it goes right into our CIP.
Yeah,
Bill, on that,
okay,
but
here we
hang on
go,
a
weighing
second.
in here, Bill.
Hang on a second, Bill, but that's part of it as we go along, that can be put in our CIP program year over year. Bill, now I'll let you take off.
Well, I did want to just kind of clarify the discussion on solar and the cost. I don't think any of the systems that are being proposed here would pay for themselves, but that's not the purpose, right? So when we did the analysis of the police station, it was a financial analysis. If the council's looking at a greenhouse gas reduction goal or a carbon neutrality goal, then that's a different metric to make that decision. So for us, none of these will financially pay for themselves. If you look through the spreadsheet on the solar systems, payback is never expected. but it may be the more cost-effective way to offset our greenhouse gas emissions. And that's just a different analysis that the council will and staff will have to go through, is to analyze what is the greatest value for the reduction. So compare that against sequestration or clean energy commitment purchase commitments, or a community solar. Rather than doing our own installation, can we get a Vista to do a community solar project where you don't have to make the capital investment, you just pay a little bit higher energy rate. And so all of those things will have to be balanced to find out what's the most cost-effective way for us to meet the goal. But because we can't take advantage of any renewable energy tax credits, it puts us really at a disadvantage on a solar system to have it be financially viable, that it's actually saving us money in the long run for energy generation, because it won't. But it will help offset our carbon footprint. And so if that is the metric and that's the goal, then I think that's the lens in which we'll be evaluating that.
Are those credits only eligible for private entities? Is that why?
Correct. It's because they're tax credits and we don't pay taxes.
So from what I saw, what my interpretation of that is it was calculated for 20 years. Would it pay for itself in 20 years? And that was the projections, and none of them would in 20 years. But that's why I asked, how long will they? That's the warranty's 20 or 25, but maybe it turns out they last 30 or 40. And some of them seemed like, when I roughly looked at the calculations, it was just like a few $1,000s shy of paying for itself in 20 years. So in 25, it might. These calculations were based on 20 years.
And I can't speak, I know at PD, even at 40, we weren't breaking even.
Okay.
So, but I don't know these systems are
And
brand.
a lot of that boils down to the scalability. And so those are some of the questions as we get into this discussion more, like up to this point for the electric vehicles, for example, the calculus that we have used is just what Bill indicates. It's, does it break even from a monetary standpoint? Does it pencil out if we take into account decreased maintenance? We're not buying gas. Does it pencil out in the long term? So we're going to have a larger upfront capital expenditure, but does it pencil out in the long run? And so that's been the metric that we've used. It may get to the point where the council says, you know what, we're willing to spend 10% more, and because we're spending that to get this trade-off. And that's what we really want to do, is look at all of the options that are available and say, where do we get the biggest bang for our buck as we pursue neutrality? Because it might be sequestration. It might be a different incentive program. It might be any of these things that help us balance that out better.
Right, and that's what I would like to see, like in some of those projections that say in 20 years, the cost of it up front, it would have cost us $5,000 more or $10,000. So per year, the cost to saving the emissions for this particular building by having solar panels would be $200 a year, for example. And then we say, it's worth $200 a year to do that for this building, to save this much energy.
Well, and with that being said, do we need to move forward with that? Yes, we do. We just can't do it on a large scale. That's the catch. We need to be smart about how we do it. But I think we're going to really have to bite the bullet on a few of these things and say, yes, if it's going to be part of our CIP program as we move forward and work through it. I mean, we got to take some kind of a stand or stance as we move along now, and we know we have limited resources, but some of it are going to have to go towards this.
And we'll never have all of the answers because we're using projections and estimates and things like that. So pretty soon it comes down to, how does the seat of your pants feel? And do we move forward and just do it?
Yeah.
And so that's where it's going to come down to, I think.
And I think having those calculations that you're basically there, it's just not in that format right now, but you figured it all out, what would that come down to per year over that 20 years that would cost to achieve this? And so starting with something like the pool that would be like the hit right off the bat as far as the carbon, then what would that end up being each year if it was over a 20-year period as far as the cost to achieve that above and beyond what that energy costs us now, right?
Well, and some of it's worth noting too, that, the cost of energy is changing.
Yeah, right.
Too. So, I mean, since the 2016 inventory, we've went up 1 or 2 cents per kilowatt hour.
Right.
And I didn't use that, as far as I know, that's not used in the projections as cost and payback periods.
And maybe
Any estimate
before
for
20
increase.
years from now, there will be a way to store all that and be able to actually use it.
Well, and then that's why I think, remaining nimble and not locking ourselves into something super long-term makes a ton of sense, so that we can take advantage of evolving technologies and evolving price points. You
Well,
know,
and
that's a lot of what's driven the electric cars is just that the technology evolved and the price evolved a lot.
One of our partners, Avis, is always looking at new ways that they can refine the ability to be able to do just exactly what you said, Kelly. And that's going to, that type of technology is going to move forward as we go along. And getting back to different things like grants and awards and different things, we're going to see those things come. Now, who know, and so we need to be able to seize the opportunity when those things come available as well.
So, by the way, are we going to circle back to the sequestration issue, especially as regards water temperature and growing trees?
Yeah, we'll definitely circle back to that
I think we've
conversation.
just got
We're getting,
two more slides.
yeah, we just
before
got two more slides to get through.
Okay.
Actually,
Maybe
Didn't
three.
want it
It's,
dropped.
it's one after this one. It's just a complex
Just saw a
slide.
summary.
Or
No, I just saw
Yeah,
a summary
so,
and,
well, I just wanted to give you guys a chance to ask or bring anything forward more about water and wastewater before we do one final slide. That's really all the reason this is here. And just to remind you
You know,
of the
the wa-
different projects that we talked about.
The wastewater thing, what I would say is, yes, we need to work with the university, see if we can't come up with something. Because it's too important to let it go by us.
And they do have their own greenhouse gas targets as well.
Yep.
So,
Yeah, exactly.
It makes
So,
sense to.
yep. And I think that to partner with them makes, in collaboration, makes total sense.
Can I go backwards just for a second on the employee commute?
Oh, sure.
One of my concerns is making sure that whatever plan you come up with doesn't find us in trouble for discriminating against people with disabilities. Okay? So
Absolutely.
you really have to balance that out, so you have some project that says, okay, we give this and this one, and we put more into a bus, and then we do this on the bike. But I would really make sure specifically on that one that you work closely with the council on that issue.
Good point.
Yeah, absolutely.
Definitely. All right, final slide. All right, so you may remember the graph that we saw at the very beginning of this presentation. This is the same one, almost, right? So we've got our 20% reduction line is up here, and then I added a 25, a 30, and a 35% reduction. So this is still based on our 2008 inventory, just like the original 20% goal is. I just wanted you to be able to see what that looks like. And then I plugged in, at somewhat randomly, the projects that are included in your evaluated potential projects, just to see where we would kind of land if we did them all, assuming that all of them were, we have all the money in the world and we can do whatever we want, and plugged them all in. And then, so this is kind of where we land. We actually land just under 5%, or just over 5%. Sorry. So, there definitely are reductions we can still make, but setting a huge goal, at least over the next 10 years, might not be feasible, given today's technologies and today's numbers.
The thought occurred to me as we're going along in the conversations that we've had this evening, and they've been, I think, great conversations. The catch is we're using new techniques to go along to this environmental conducive for what we want to do. And maybe going about it saying, well, we'd like to do 20% now, 20% and 20%. Maybe that's not the realistic thing and a way to really slay the dragon in a sense. But we need to be moving forward. We're doing that through things like looking at electric vehicles throughout the entire city, the electric lawnmowers with solar panels on them, so on and so forth. Solar panels out at the HERC that will heat the pool as well as shade cars in the summer. I mean, those are all very positive things that we need to move forward with that are gainers for us. Charging stations, so on and so forth. And of course, we don't know how all that's going to unravel in the future. We're just kind of guessing on some of those things. But it's going to be one of those things that's going to move us forward, I think, in a big way. Now, how it comes as a percentage, I've got no idea, but it's a right move forward.
I agree, Mr. Mayor, and what we would really like to do going out of this with the council's direction is, as we've talked, this is one half of the equation. And we really want to do a couple things. One, we want to not put our programs on pause. We want to continue analyzing and bringing forward those easy wins to the council. Let's look at those really easy things like, let's look at these building envelopes. Let's change out the rest of the LEDs. Let's continue these processes. Let's continue analyzing and changing out the fleet vehicles. But we'd like to take some time to really look at that sequestration side, take a look at what we're already sequestering. We have park properties. We have, we have areas that we have some sequestration. We have our reuse that goes to the University of Idaho, which is water they're not pumping. So we have some sequestration numbers that we'd really like to calculate. And so up to this point, we were really focused on trying to hit that 20%. So that's really where we're putting our energy is, okay, what projects can we do? What do we got to do to hit that 20% by 2020? Hit that, and then we pivoted really quickly, and just in the last several months have really committed to looking at these numbers so that we could have something to show you as far as where are we at, what projects are on the horizon, and where are we going. So now we'd really love to refine that, look at the sequestration numbers, keep bringing projects that are conducive to further refining our emissions to the council, and then take a really hard look at other programs around the country. There's a lot of great things that municipalities and private entities are doing so that we can take a look at some of those other opportunities, outside the box ideas, and come back to the council then with over multiple stages. I mean, this is something we're going to continually have to work on, but come back with an idea of what carbon neutrality actually looks like for us.
I guess my sense is I thought what Bill said was very interesting in terms of, we looked at the police department on a financial level, we didn't look at it as a carbon emissions issue. And I guess my sense is that one way to look at that is potentially decide that there's going to be a certain amount of money every year dedicated to carbon reduction, and not new money, not like, okay, something that we've already been doing, but there's got to be a way that says, okay, this is how much money we are going to dedicate to that issue. And that based on that, then it's kind of relying upon, from my perspective, it would be relying upon you all to say, okay, if we have X number of dollars, these are the things we can do, and then there would be a dialogue. But I do think that when it comes to budgeting, we've got to really look at the issue of how do we do this? If we're really committed to it, we got to stop dancing around the edges. And make a systematic approach towards it.
I think you hit the nail on the head, Maureen. That's what so the reason that we started with this capital plan, because these are the projects we know that we're going to be bringing forward to council. And so we wanted to identify opportunities within this plan to do something different. And I think, Brandy said something I think was insightful as far as just even how we present the data to you. Mm-hmm. And so when we come, we can say, okay, we want to take a realistic look. Like, as the mayor said, we don't have a ton of money. And and we have basic services we just have to provide. We can't cut back on supplying water because we want to put solar panels on something. And so, but give you guys a realistic look and say, okay, here's this project, here are some options to green this thing up. Mm-hmm. Here's what that would cost, and this is the impact in our capital program. This is something that might have to get delayed. This is something that, these are the impacts that we would have, so that we have a good comprehensive look of what the options are and what the impacts are.
But that's also why it needs to be in a capital improvement projects year over year over year. Maureen, that's what you're saying, not just
exactly.
new money.
You just put it into city terms, capital projects, guys.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, I'm going to ask a really hard question. Everyone that's been very involved in this and says, we want to see the city of Moscow do what other cities have done in the state of Idaho, like in southern Idaho, and commit to 100% clean energy for city operations by 2030. I'm reading that from an email because we got a lot of that email. So this makes it sound like that's not, what do you think? What do you say to that?
I'll let Kelly speak to this in a minute.
Thank you, Kelly, for taking the bullet for Tyler.
Sorry.
I don't know that that's not feasible, Brandy. I just don't, what we want to have, I guess, we'll do whatever the council instructs us to do. But what we would like to have is a really, really accurate view of what that means. Stretch goals are fine. It's fine to have a stretch goal. It motivates you, it pushes you, just like this 20% goal. I mean, we were scrambling, trying to find projects so that we could hit this 20% goal. So I don't think that's a bad thing. What we don't want to have is a pie in the sky goal that we really can't define or define a path to it. So it becomes something that we all put on a bulletin board and it gains dust, and then it comes and it goes and we say, oh yeah, remember that. And so I think in no way are we opposed to anything like that. We just want to really understand the numbers so we know what carbon neutrality looks like for city operations.
Well, and with these other cities, like, what did they do? Did they just decide we're just going to put that out there and hope for the best, or do they?
Yeah, pretty much.
Right. Do they? I mean, it's hard for me to imagine that they've done more detailed analysis than you have done here.
Well, there's a couple different terms that are being used out there. There's carbon neutral, which to me is kind of you can still have carbon emissions, but the offsets that you
Right.
generate create that neutrality.
Uh-huh.
And then there's carbon-free,
Right.
which to me is a little more difficult
Yeah.
to wrap our head around because because of Avista and their energy portfolio.
And then you also have the term, you know,
So-
100% green energy, which is a
Right.
different term that is like, okay, so that's one of the things we want to do is do the research on what other municipalities are doing. Up to this point, we've tried to get our house in order and take a look at our numbers and see what's going on. So we really want to do that outreach, do that research, and find out, you know, they may have run an amazingly more detailed analysis and be able to provide us with a lot of cool information that we're like, oh, shoot, this is neat. These are some cool projects and whatever. And so that will give us the opportunity to do that and to know how they're defining that term. It may just be that Idaho Power said, hey, we're going to have all green energy by 2030. And so they say by extension, hey, we're going to have all green energy by 2030. I don't
yeah,
know.
that would
I
be-
don't know how that was calculated.
You know,
Easy for them.
the good news about that 20% this past decade, it's made all of us think differently. And that's what's critical on this. We're talking about carbon neutrality, and I like that term, Kyle, because it's offsetting. We're doing things and we're moving forward. And we're looking at different things that we can do and achieve. And this conversation that we've had this past 2 hours has been great talking about those things. And none of us are going to forget it. We're going to keep moving forward with it. Now,
Sorry, go ahead.
with that being said, we're going to run into a few bumps, there's no doubt about it. But the catch is we're going to be on some type of a program where we're working through it. Gina?
I love too, the combination of what we and Bill are saying with moving forward and with our combined interest in this as a mindset that we operate our city under. But then combine it with the level of research and detail and attention to the impacts of what we're doing, including impacts to the citizenry. What does that mean if we say X amount of clean energy by this time? Does that mean that Avista has to make huge changes or we make huge changes that impact our citizens? So I really am energized by the three of you in that it is so deliberate what we're doing, that I really feel like we'll do it in a measured, solid way.
As a follow-up to that, I guess my sense is that I think that in some respects, the city is an example. And from that says, okay, this is how you can actually do solar. This is how you can get yourself a little tractor that, and you can do, whatever it happens to be. But the answer is that even though I know we're focusing on the city, I think that we also have an obligation in some respects to publicize the information and how we can do it and how the citizenry can do it.
And we do have an environmental stewardship award program that we started to implement pre-COVID. And one of the major goals of that program was to interact with the business community, our commercial customers, and give them as much information as they wanted to make those informed decisions.
So I was just thinking, my fear is I don't want to go so deep into the city that we forget that we also have an obligation to the businesses and the residents here in
I think you're
Mossburg.
so right, Marina. I like the number of times since my city vehicle is a fully electric vehicle now, the one that I drive. I can't count how many times a resident has come up and said, "That's so cool. Is that electric? Yeah, it's fully electric. Oh my gosh, do you like driving it? Is that like?" And it's just they see that the city makes that transition. I think that has an impact. I think it shows, that feasibility and viability. And I think you're right. Like having programs where we publicize those things that we're doing, and we have big graphics all over our very first EV that said it, fully electric vehicle, and try and make sure that people understand what it
And our
is that we're doing
parades,
and
when we
why.
go back to having parades, we're going to put the mayor back in one of those little
Back in the
tractors that can't go more than 5 miles an hour, and he's going to go down the street with
They'll
a
let me
full-
drive it for once. But that's all the fact. Of course, I could always run over something even at 5 miles
sure
an
you
hour.
will.
So-
But, I mean, I guess I sit there and think, really, that's another way of doing it, because you guys do a great job of sending notices out every month, but there's also a sense of how do we get out there and show, I'm driving an electric vehicle, and it works really well. We got a tractor, we got one of those weed things.
Yeah.
Steam weeder.
Well, and that's what
Steamer?
our climate action work group is really focused on right now is impacts beyond city operations. And so I know they're eager to talk to you, you all at some point in the near future.
Tina's joined us.
So with these emails we're getting, I mean, one of the things that is a clean fleet is technologically and financially feasible by 2030. And I see from this chart that you have a plan for that. And
Yeah.
it sounds like that is something that the city is actively already, has committed to doing.
Yep,
Okay.
very much.
And then the 100% clean electricity for city operations, that seems, it's so dependent on a Vista that we don't have
That's-
any
that's what I
control over that
really-
other than offsets that neutralize it, but don't have really the ability to do that unless we generate our own power.
That's why we really want to be realistic. You know,
Yeah.
we want to be realistic about this, and we don't want to sell people a bill of goods. We want
Right.
to say, this is realistically what we can do. And so I think the fleet's a good example. As I said, we've updated that plan 3 times to accommodate, and so now I can confidently say that, you know, within our replacement cycle, you know, for any of those light vehicles, like, they're getting replaced with fully electrics. What I think I'll be able to say by 2030 or a little later is that, yeah, I have a viable snowplow option. I have a viable dump truck option. I have a viable street sweeper option. I don't know that. And so I'm not willing to trot out there and say, hey, you bet we're going to do it, because that option isn't available right now.
But what I'm hearing from you is, though, and from Kelly, is that you're watching that, you're waiting for it, you're seeing things develop, and when they are technologically feasible and financially feasible, you're just waiting for that. And you're gonna know when that time comes, and
And we haven't been afraid to be early adopters on it. Like,
Yeah.
there's nobody else in the region that has an electric mower. And
Yeah.
we're setting up a demo on an electric mower. We haven't been afraid to pull the trigger on that, but we are trying to be thoughtful and have good procedures in place so that we make sure we don't get burned in the process too.
And keep in mind, while this conversation we're having, the less fossil fuels that we're burning. Every time we have something that's electric, it's less fossil fuel. And that's one of the things that we're really going after, is it not?
Yes.
And so we're making progress that way, and we got to keep chipping away at the iceberg with the ice pick. And that's what we need to do, chunk, ka chunk.
well, and it really sounds like you are finished this stage, you finished the 20% by 2020, you finished getting all this data ready for this presentation, and now you're kind of saying we need to take that next step and look into what are these other cities doing, what learn more about what could we do here, and you're not really ready to advise us on a realistic goal.
Yeah, that's, as we started to prepare for this, the initial thought was, okay, we've got to have a goal-setting session. And as we got into that, we realized that we couldn't have a meaningful conversation about that because we couldn't realistically provide you all the data that you would need to throw out a realistic goal. And we didn't want to have it be just a shoot from the hip, something that makes us feel good. We want it to be something that we have a plan for us, because when you guys give us marching orders, we march. And it's something that we really want to be able to implement and implement accurately.
So
Our process for moving forward with new building, these measures will be standard. The same way we've talked about with family-friendly bathrooms, from now on, that's what will be, so.
We haven't discussed new building construction for cities or any sort of those
Uh-huh.
standards, and that's something that we'd work really closely with the community planning and design group, because that's really their wheelhouse, and so we'd work just closely with them. But, it's certainly something we could take into account.
And that could get really messy too, because building a new wastewater treatment facility is going to be different than an office building, is going to be different than a city shop.
Oh, yeah,
And
that would have
so
to be,
then
yeah.
pretty soon you're into the weeds.
Well, yeah, you would have to, for sure. I mean, you can't have one thing apply to everything, but,
It'd have to be very project
yes,
specific.
yeah.
Well, and I think the metrics that were evaluated with the police station were really comprehensive.
Right,
And
I agree.
it just became a
It strikes
fiscal decision.
What strikes me after this conversation we're having is having another one of these meetings in about 5 or 6 months, so we can see, because by then, the police station's gonna be open, and we can see and we can measure, and that's something you guys can report on. You talked about a new building, Brandy.
Yeah.
And then we can see where we're at, because this conversation is gonna be an ongoing conversation. It's not gonna be once a year, and just,
Right.
and that, or every 2 years or whatever. I think this conversation needs to be going on every 5, 6 months to see where we're at, see what kind of new things we have, what our possibilities are, and perhaps there are grants and there are other new things that come through this infrastructure bill that we know is going to come sometime in America I think that is what we need to do. What do you guys think?
I agree with that, but I also want to be responsive to what I feel like is a sense of urgency among the community. And so I want us to get to a point where we have the information we need to set a climate neutrality goal, I'll say carbon neutrality goal. So that's the impression that I'm getting from the communication that we're receiving. That's my sentiment as well. I'm thrilled with how much information we have tonight. And I feel like it's a big step between when we added this to the strategic plan and tonight. And thank you for all of your work on this. It's really, really helpful. But that's what I would like to know is what a realistic timeline for that next conversation is so that we can all come in equipped to make that choice and talk about it.
There is some general basic knowledge, though, that not all of us have, that before we are equipped to make any decision like that, I need to see you 5 or 6 more times. And you need to show me in these moments, if it's a project-specific moment, here's where we can further this concept that we all have, and here's how much we'll save carbon-wise or reduce carbon-wise. Those are the kind of things that if you're going to ask me for a decision of this magnitude, that I don't live in that world regularly, lay the groundwork.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's.
Can I just, real quick, just off your, so there's a column in the packet that talks about the cost per metric ton. That's not comparing apples to apples necessarily, so it, again, like I said, it's planning level
It's one of
exercise.
those we need to
Right.
look at the best way to,
Yeah,
the best way to present that information.
yeah.
Well, I think it's important too, to add on to that, I mean, right here in the staff report, and it's, bring forward feasible projects, which, I mean, like you were saying earlier, Tyler, I just want to reinforce the fact that it's super easy to be like, yep, I mean, we do love all these things. I feel pretty confident saying everyone up here is really excited about all of this. It's also really expensive, and so finding ways, I think it's important to remember that while we make these goals, that we're also talking about, this is how much we can save energy-wise, this is how much it's going to cost, and this is how we do it. And you all are great about that, but it's just important to reinforce that for everybody listening, that feasible is the key word.
And I think
in all of
it's a
this.
huge thing because I don't want it to sound dismissive at all, but it's really easy looking in a vacuum at this project and saying, oh, it's only 15% more on this $500,000 project to tack this on there. And so why wouldn't we? It's only 15% more. But when you look at the ripple effect that can have on a capital program, and a really strapped capital program in a lot of cases, that's where we really have to balance it out, because every one of these things will have a domino effect down through. And that's not to minimize the importance of this at all. It's just that we conduct life-sustaining work as a municipality. And so we don't have the option to just relegate maintenance on this stuff to shut this building down or to close down this pump station or to whatever. So that's the really tough part, is our operations have to run and have to run consistently. And so we're trying to eke out with very limited resources creatively how we add this stuff in. And so I don't want to lose that
Exactly.
within it, because I think that is a really important component, is looking at the overall impact of whatever we engage in.
That's
so
why
I
it's
wanna just-
critical we meet frequently.
I just want to add one thing on that, and that is really a sense of trying to figure out, I'm going to reiterate what Bill said, because there's that need to figure out who's writing the grants, where there's money out there, because that's how we get so many of our projects done. And under this, it appears that there is going to be money, a lot of money coming in for infrastructure. And so let's be on top of that. And I don't know if it's your person or, specifically in your unit, or the person who works for the city who's our grant writer does it, but that would be a really high priority for me to make sure that that's a focus.
Yeah, and Elisa Anderson, our grants writer, is really good at staying abreast of that stuff. And we all try and feed her stuff as we see it coming in, and she'll check it out and look at the provisions. And so, yeah, that's going to be a big component.
Because it's new money.
Yeah, exactly. Well, folks, we had a lot of good conversations tonight. We've been at it not quite 2.5 hours. How about adjourning? What do you folks think? Sound good? Tyler, Kelly, Kyle, thank you very much. And Kelly, I don't see you enough, but we're going to see more of each other as we go along, because these things are going to, things are getting better for us.
Okay, so, Bill, we have to actually acknowledge Tina, who's in the back of the room right now.
Tina, yes.
Sir.
We really have to
Commission
acknowledge
member.
her for all the work that they did, the COG did, and the reports that you did, and the fact that you went to every single one of our commissions. And I'm assuming so because I saw 3 of those presentations. And that you really did it, you're out there to educate people, and so thank you and thank your group.
And thank you for the Sustainable Environment Commission's group.
Yeah.
With that, ladies and gentlemen, we will abandon at 7:44. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for being with us.